There we go. Welcome back to Senate Education, Wednesday, March 1st, 3:10. We've been talking about school safety, and one of the things we've been saying in committee is actually it'd be great to get our heads around sort of a on-the-ground understanding of how all this works. And Mr. Marino was kind enough. Mr. Marino, you're the principal, right, at the Williston Central School?
Hi, I'm lead principal at the Williston School, so I support both Allenbrook and Williston Central.
Great.
Hello, everybody.
And great. And so we're thrilled to have you here. We're going to take advantage of having you here, not only to talk about school safety, but we will also have a couple other questions for you. And we really appreciate it since we know you're on break right now. I don't know if you ever really get a break from the incredible work you're committed to, but we do appreciate you helping us out with our conversation around school safety. And your name was given to us by Dee Barvik, the director of the Violence Prevention Task Force, Vermont's director of Violence Prevention Task Force. So if you could just tell us, Mr. Marino, a little bit about your work and how your role on the in your school, and then also a little bit around the role you play as it relates to school safety. That would be great.
Certainly. So my name's Greg Marino. I am in my 8th year as lead principal at the Williston Schools, which is part of Champlain Valley School District. For all that time, I have also served as the chair of the Williston School Safety Committee. I've also been involved as in co-leading the district safety efforts at CVSD with the chief operations officer. Previously, it was Gene Jensen. Now it's Gary Marcris. I have been a school administrator in Vermont, involved in school safety work for 16 years since I moved here with my family in 2007. And this is my 29th year in education. Wow. So in my role as the chair of the safety committee, the school safety efforts are a big part of my responsibilities.
Terrific. So can you tell us a little bit about, you have a task force?
We don't have something called the task force. We have a school safety committee.
Okay. Could you tell us a little bit about that and how it works?
Certainly. So I think all of the schools in CVSD have a similar type of team. In Williston, we have a school safety committee that consists of staff from both Allenbrook School and Williston Central. That staff is intentionally inclusive of classroom teachers, support staff, technology experts, people responsible for running our access control protocol. In other words, people who work the front desk and buzz people in every day. We have a mental health, we have school nurse. We have partners on the town as part of our committee. That is inclusive of the school library because they share a driveway with us. So the school library representative is there. Standing members from Williston Police Department, Williston Fire. We also have the rec department director as part of the team. And then our district facilities director comes and sits in on many of our meetings, and our local Williston facilities director is part of the committee. We meet monthly for about an hour and 15 minutes, hour and a half. And the purpose of our meetings is really to help support faculty and staff being in our systems and structures to be more prepared, more aware and knowledgeable about school safety efforts, in an effort to help keep everybody safe.
So what would you consider to be an incident or something where the group that you just mentioned needs to come together quickly?
Okay, so the group that I just described is our safety committee, and that is a little bit different than like our behavioral threat assessment team. Our safety committee is a standing committee that works on the work. So we're doing the work around procedures, around protocols, supporting practices and drills, around our options-based protocols, trying to give information to staff that they need to be successful and to build those skills. And then we've had a number of people that are on our safety committee, as well as other professionals in our schools trained to be part of our threat assessment team. So our threat assessment team, again, there's carryover from some people on the safety committee. And then also we have other folks like our school counselors. I know I mentioned my nurse already, a school psychologist. And so those folks have been trained in behavioral threat assessment. And then if something comes up, a concern comes to our attention where we are concerned that it could be a threat of violence, we then pull that team together. At first, we do an initial review because the protocol we've been trained in has a few screening questions that a small group, usually it's a few administrators and one or two members of that team that's been trained to do that initial screening to determine, is a threat assessment appropriate in this case? If so, then we pull a threat assessment team together and we run through the protocol based on the situation.
And could you tell us a little bit about the protocol?
Certainly. So the first, as I mentioned initially, there's a screening exercise, and that screening exercise asks, first and foremost, is this an emergency? Like, is someone in imminent danger? Obviously, if it is, you want to make sure you're following your procedures for that. And then beyond that, it asks, is there a need to run an assessment? Has the person threatened violence or made any other communication about intent to threaten violence or intends to do violence? Have these concerns, are they being experienced by other people? Have behaviors raised concerns about violence to self or others? Is there a fearful victim or third party? And then it asks, does the student have a behavior intervention plan, a 504 plan, an IEP plan, and or health plan? And then it asks some questions about whether or not the behavior could be a manifestation or a baseline behavior for a student on one of those plans. And that helps determine whether or not to run the threat assessment. And then the threat assessment itself, if we decide that it is appropriate, it just asks, first of all, the premise of threat assessment is to collect as much information before you're making, from the training, the phrase is collect the dots before connecting the dots. And so that phrase collecting the dots really speaks to bringing in as many people who have real on the ground daily knowledge of this particular situation. So people who interact with this person of concern or who, this behavior of concern, people who interact with them daily. So we want to make sure we're talking with all of those people and not making any assumptions based on, the report that came in. So, okay, that could be the teacher who maybe the report was a result of something a student wrote in a journal where they wrote some explicit language around causing harm. So that teacher, we'd want to have that teacher at the table and ask about that. We'd want to certainly talk to the caregivers of that person. We'd want to talk to other people that person interacts with on a regular basis, people who would notice changes in behavior, people who would have, real day-to-day information that was reliable about that person. And then the protocol goes through and asks you to consider these various questions. I think there are 11 or 12 questions on the protocol. And at the end of the process, it essentially asks, based on this information you've collected, based on the responses to these questions that the team has responded to the best of their ability, do you think this person could be on a pathway to causing harm, either to themselves or to others? And if the answer is yes, then essentially the protocol directs you to create an intervention plan. And this part, frankly, as an educator, if a student, if a concern like this has come up where someone's wondering about safety anyway, you're likely going to create some kind of intervention for that student anyway. But this, when something comes our way that makes people think about, yikes, this student might be unsafe, or I might be unsafe as a result of what I just heard, or this other student is feeling unsafe, it has been very helpful to have a really objective process to kind of lean into, where you can take a breath, collect the information, use the questions to objectively look at the situation, and then at the end, build a plan of intervention to support that situation. It could be in the form of like an educational support team plan, like an EST plan. It could be some other type of intervention plan where you're pulling in variety of supports that the school has at its disposal. But what I have found about the threat assessment process is in moments where it could feel, pretty uncomfortable and pretty, you can get some pretty unraveled folks, understandably. It gives you this thing to turn to, this tool to turn to that's very procedurally based. It's very objective. Not all the answers are crystal clear in terms of like, oh yeah, the 8 people here all unequivocally agree the answer to this question is yes. It doesn't always work out that way, but at least it gives you a process to collect, to have the conversation, and at the end, this decision whether to build an intervention plan or not for the student. I hope that kind of get at your question.
Senator Bulick and Senator Williams.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for your testimony, Principal Marino. I was wondering how often your behavioral threat teams typically meet. Is this a rare occurrence? Is it more regular? And also just wondering if the assessment has ever ended, or any of the assessments have ended in suspension at all.
That's a great question. So
Or
I can.
expulsion.
Okay, no, we have never expelled a student. So the question about how often at Williston, I would say in the past, since we've been trained, so last year, half of this year, we have probably run 4 threat assessment processes, maybe 5 threat assessments in the last 2 years, 4 or 5. In terms of suspension, we don't use the threat assessment process as a way to determine our response to a particular behavior. The threat assessment process really helps determine the severity of a person causing potential harm or not, and how to intervene and build a plan of support around that to interrupt that. But regardless of the threat assessment process, we still have our code of conduct. We still have all of the responses to different behaviors at our disposal that we could apply or not apply. We don't use the threat assessment process to determine whether or not we would suspend a student. We would make a decision to suspend a student based on the circumstances of the particular behavior. We don't make those suspension decisions contingent upon a threat assessment. They're two parallel processes that have slightly different purposes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes.
So you obviously have this plan written down. Did it come from an experience someone had or from some training? Now, obviously, this information gets condensed down to your situation from other schools where things have happened, but is it something that's on your school website so people can look at it so they understand what you do in a situation?
Great question. Well, in terms of how we got to the process that we use is we were trained in the Sigma process. The state offered free threat assessment training for Vermont educators starting, I guess, about a couple years back. We took advantage of that training. We had probably 16, 17 professionals from the Williston schools trained in threat assessment. Recently, I went also additionally took the Train the Trainer workshop that was offered this year. So that feels pretty fresh for me.
Which state agency?
Say that again?
Which state agency did the training?
It was sponsored by, it came from the AOE field memo, sponsored by the School Safety Center, but I think Sigma did the training, but sponsored by the AOE, I believe.
Okay.
I was in the training with a number of Vermont educators. In terms of the process being on our website, I don't know the answer to that. I don't think it is. I don't think the threat assessment protocol is posted on our website. I don't see a reason why it couldn't be. That could be a question I could bring back to my superintendent and communications director.
So the reason I asked was that sometimes it sounds like you got a good plan. You've had some situational training exercises that were realistic. Do you do like an after action review after the situation and sit down and go, we did this right, we did this wrong, and this next time it happens, this is what we're going to do. And that if it was in writing, then other schools that haven't got the protocols you've got might be able to get a hold of it and adopt it. I think that's a uniformity that I'm looking for.
Yes. Yes, I mean, I think that's one advantage of having it become statute, and that you have a shared foundation of common training across schools, and a shared at least framework for a process, so people aren't having to make it up or call around, send me yours. It's here it is.
Right.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. So good testimony. I'm curious, in your threat assessment process or in Mason, your experience, to what scope do you have the parents involved in this process?
To whatever extent that we can. So most of the time that means that they are quite involved. Whether it is, I can think of one instance in the last year where they were in the room with a larger team, actively participating, going through the protocol. And that always feels good to me because it feels transparent. We much like our educational support team process, it's nice to be able to say, we have this protocol that we've been trained in to help support situations that we encounter with that where somebody could be at risk of causing themselves harm or somebody else harm. So it's nice to be able to say that we have this process and this thing that we've been trained in. So I remember that day sitting in my office with that team and the parents being at the table, and it felt very collaborative. Then in other situations where it's not practical or possible for the parent to be in the room, we would be having a separate interview with that parent, whether over the phone or in person, collecting the information, explaining what we're doing as the threat assessment. So parents are involved to the extent that they can be.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Mr. Moreno at this point. It's very helpful. very helpful. We've been looking for some, some understanding of how things are working in individual schools. We're gonna keep going. We're gonna have a walkthrough of a new version of the bill now. And then we'll, if you're able to, Greg, we might be back in contact with you. We understand you're a busy person, but we might follow up with you and ask you to testify again or weigh in on certain things. Before you do go though, Senator Gulick, I believe you're a senator, right?
I am.
Yeah, your
Oh,
question.
no,
Senator.
it depends on where you live. I don't know where you live, Greg, but wondering when your school was built. Your
Oh,
school,
yes,
your
good question.
school is the one with the blue roof, correct?
That's one of our schools. So I live in Williston, and which is also where I work, because I'm lucky enough to live there as well. So we have the two schools, Allenbrook School, which is pre-K through 2, and then Williston Central, which is 3rd through 8th grade. Allenbrook School was built in 1996, I believe, maybe 95, 96. And Williston Central started in 1949 with a little brick section and has grown since then, and a lot of iterations since then.
Okay, thank you. The one that was built in 96 is in pretty good shape then?
Well, we're coming up on 30 years, and it's got its issues comparatively to what other school districts and locations are dealing with. I'd say it's in okay shape. But it's got its issues, especially related to building envelope. The way the building was constructed really didn't give the attention deserved to the exterior envelope of the building. So we also happen to be in a little space crunch,
Right.
as you may be aware of with the demographics in Williston.
Yeah, thank you very much.
You are welcome.
Senator Gulick is leading the charge on getting our schools, those that can still continue to be renovated, but really, how can we get some new school buildings in the state for 21st century learning? And we're hearing that the need is there for sure.
No, that's for sure. Absolutely.
Any other questions for Mr. Marino? Great. Okay, thank you, Mr. Marino.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
You are welcome. Thanks for this opportunity, and thanks for the work you do.
Thanks for the work you do. Okay.
Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Is, I think, going to be in here in a second to take us through a new version of the school safety bill.